My name is Abena Osei. I'm 38 years old. 11 months after my mother was moved into a memory care facility, I discovered that the house she'd lived in for 29 years, the house I grew up in, the house with her handwriting still on the height chart in the kitchen doorframe, had been transferred out of our family using a document my mother never signed. I took that document and a letter written in my mother's handwriting that my sister did not know existed to a real estate attorney named Clifford Boateng. And 3 weeks later, my sister's attorney called me, not to threaten me, not to negotiate, to ask me to please stop. The moment it changed was a Tuesday afternoon in February. I was sitting in my mother's old kitchen, going through her things, when I opened a dented tin recipe box I'd seen 100 times growing up. I pulled out a card that wasn't a recipe at all. Before I tell you what was on it, hit subscribe, hit like, and let's go back to where this story actually begins. My mother's name is Abena Osei. She came to the United States from Kumasi, Ghana in 1981, 23 years old, and carrying one suitcase and a tin box full of index cards with her mother's recipes written on them in a handwriting so dense, and looping it looked like it was trying to hold everything in place. She settled in Decatur, Georgia, because a church connection had found her a room with a family there, and because she liked the way the street trees met overhead in summer and made the roads feel like tunnels of green. She got a job pressing and steaming at a dry cleaners on Commerce Drive. She sent money home every month without fail. She learned English fast and spoke it with an accent that never softened, because she was proud of it, or proud of every place she came from. She met my father, Emmanuel Osei, at a community gathering in 1983. He was from Accra, serious and funny in equal measure, a man who could make you cry laughing with a story and then turn around and quote you a Bible verse without irony. They married in 1984. My sister Patricia was born in 1985. I was born in 1986. In 1995, my parents bought the house on Sycamore Hill Road. It was a 3-bedroom craftsman bungalow with a wide front porch, hardwood floors that creaked in specific places that each of us knew by heart, and a kitchen with south-facing windows that my mother loved because the light lasted into the late afternoon. She planted marigolds along the front walk. She kept the recipe tin on the second shelf of the pantry, wedged between a jar of dried crayfish and a bottle of palm oil. My father died in 2009. Heart attack, sudden, no warning. He was 51 years old. After he died, the house changed shape the way a house does when you lose someone who filled it. The rooms felt larger and quieter. My mother still cooked every day. She said cooking was how she talked to him. She still set the table for two sometimes, without noticing. She kept his reading glasses on the nightstand for almost a year before she put them away. My mother kept working at the dry cleaners until she was 67. Then she retired and spent her days in her garden and on her porch, and at her church, First Emmanuel Presbyterian, where she had sung in the choir for 30 years and still had the strongest soprano voice in the second row. I am telling you all of this because I want you to understand what the house on Sycamore Hill Road was. It was not a financial asset. It was not a piece of property in a transaction. It was my mother's life organized into rooms. It was the place she came to after everything, the hard job, the grief, the years of building something in a country that wasn't the one she was born in. It was the place where her handwriting was still on the wall. Patricia understood this too once, or I believed she did. I am a school librarian. I have worked at Oakhurst Elementary in Decatur for 12 years. I am not wealthy. I have a 1-bedroom apartment 8 minutes from my school, a 2017 Honda Civic, and a small savings account I add to in good months and ignore in bad ones. I am not married. I had a relationship that ended in 2019, and I am still, periodically, sad about it. In the specific way, you are sad about things that were good and simply stopped. Patricia is 3 years older than me. She works in corporate HR for a logistics company in Alpharetta. She married a man named Greg Ashworth in 2010. Greg is a project manager, pleasant in the way of someone who has learned to be pleasant as a professional skill, not a natural one. They live in a 4-bedroom house in a development with a homeowners association. They have 2 children, 11 and 13. We were not close, Patricia and I, not as adults. We loved each other the way sisters do when they have the same parents and the same childhood, and then become very different people who have to rediscover each other at Christmas. We were polite. We called each other on birthdays. We showed up for the things that required showing up. My mother was the center. She was the reason we were in the same room. For most of my adult life, I thought that was enough. My mother had cooked on the same gas range for 20 years without incident. In the spring of 2019, she left a burner on overnight 3 times in 6 weeks. She didn't remember doing it. The 3rd time, she had also left a kitchen towel draped across the adjacent burner. The towel had scorched a brown ring into its edge. I found out about this not from my mother, but from her neighbor, Mrs. Adiz Nwasu, who lived 2 houses down and had been friends with my mother since before I was in high school. Mrs. Nwasu was 74 and sharp as a new pencil, and deeply invested in the well-being of my mother in the specific, alert way of a person who had known loss and taken careful notes. "Diana, I am going to say something," she told me on the phone, her voice measured. "Your mother left the burner on again. I smelled it from the porch when I walked by at 7 in the morning. I knocked and she let me in and she didn't know the burner was on. She thought she had turned everything off before bed. She was not frightened. That is what frightens me." I drove to Decatur that Saturday and took my mother to her doctor. Dr. Patricia Ademi, the same GP my mother had been seeing for 11 years, ran a cognitive assessment and gently, carefully, told us what we had both already started to know. My mother had early-stage dementia. It was manageable for now. It would not remain manageable. My mother sat in the exam room and listened and nodded and said, "I know, just that. I know." And then she asked Dr. Ademi whether she could still drive, and when the answer was yes for now, but we should revisit in 6 months, my mother said, "Good. I have a church function on the 14th. She was 70 years old. She was not a woman who fell apart in front of people. I called Patricia from the parking lot of the medical building. I told her everything. Patricia was quiet for a moment and then said, "I'll come down next weekend. We need to talk about next steps." Next steps was Patricia's phrase. She used it at work, I think. It sounded organized and forward-moving and revealed nothing about the fact that our mother had just been told she was losing her mind by degrees. Patricia came the following Saturday. We sat at our mother's kitchen table and had a conversation that felt, in retrospect, like a negotiation I didn't know I was in. The basics were agreed quickly. We would set up medication management. We would install a gas shutoff device on the stove. We would have someone check in during the week. Patricia said she had a contact through her company's HR network who could recommend home care agencies. I said I would come down every other Saturday. Then Patricia said, "We should also think about the house." I said, "What about it?" "Protecting it," she said. "Making sure it's structured correctly. In case Mama needs a higher level of care at some point, you don't want the house to be vulnerable." I told her I thought that was something to talk to an attorney about when the time came. She agreed. She dropped it. I did not think about this conversation again for 8 months. In retrospect, I should have thought about it every day. The home care aide Patricia arranged was a woman named Roselle who came Monday through Friday from 8 to noon. She was capable and kind. My mother liked her. I came on alternating Saturdays and stayed until Sunday evening. Patricia came occasionally. She said Greg's schedule made it difficult to get away, and her children's weekend activities were complicated to reschedule. I accepted this. I didn't want to fight. I wanted my mother to be okay. In early 2020, just before the world became what it became, my mother stopped remembering what day it was. Then she stopped remembering what month it was. She could still tell you her church's address from 40 years ago. She could still sing all of Abide With Me from beginning to end, every verse in tune. The long ago things held on longest. By June 2020, She could not safely be alone at night. By September, we had the second conversation about next steps. This time, Patricia was the one who called it. "There's a facility," she said. "Sunrise Memory Care in Avondale Estates. I've toured it. It's warm. They know how to handle people like Mama." I drove to Sunrise. I walked through it. I sat in the common room and watched residents and aides move around each other. It smelled clean. There were photographs on the walls. A woman near the window was doing a puzzle. My mother moved in on the 3rd of October 2020. She carried her Bible, her photo album, and the tin recipe box. 2 weeks later, Patricia called to tell me she was handling the house, the utilities, the bills, the upkeep. "You're all the way over here," I said, meaning across the city. "It's fine," Patricia said. "I'll manage it." I said thank you. I meant it. My mother had been at Sunrise Memory Care for about 4 months when I noticed something small and wrong. I was visiting on a Saturday in late January 2021, sitting with her in her room, when a member of the Sunrise administrative staff knocked and asked if she could go over some paperwork with my mother's next of kin representative. I said I was her daughter. She said, "Oh, we have your sister Patricia listed as the primary contact and the person authorized to make decisions on Mrs. Osei's behalf." I had not been told this. I had not signed anything. I had not been asked. I called Patricia that evening and asked her about it. She said it was practical, she was closer, she had a more flexible work schedule, she didn't. It made sense for one person to be the point of contact. She said, "It doesn't mean anything, Di. It's just logistics." I did not push it. I filed it somewhere uncomfortable and tried to forget it. In March 2021, I drove by the house on Sycamore Hill Road on my way to visit a friend who lived 2 neighborhoods over. The marigolds my mother had always planted along the front walk were gone. There was gravel where they had been. I stopped and sat in my car and looked at the gravel for a long time. I didn't get out. I drove away. I called Patricia and asked about the marigolds. She said they were high maintenance and she'd had someone clear the bed. "The house needs to look maintained, Diana. We don't want it to look vacant." I didn't know how to explain why the marigolds mattered. I knew that they did. In May 2021, I was going through some old paperwork I'd brought home from my mother's house the previous year, just documents I'd collected in a file box, meaning to organize. Property tax statements, insurance renewal letters, that kind of thing. I noticed the most recent property tax statement I had was from 2019. I went to the DeKalb County Tax Assessor's website and looked up the property. The owner of record was not Abena Osei. It was a company called Ashworth Property Holdings, LLC. Greg Ashworth, Patricia's husband. I sat at my kitchen table at 11:30 on a Wednesday night and read the screen 3 times. The transfer date was November 14, 2020, 6 weeks after my mother moved into Sunrise, 42 days. I looked up Ashworth Property Holdings, LLC in the Georgia Secretary of State Business Registry. It had been formed on October 22, 2020, 19 days after my mother moved into memory care. My hands were completely still. I noticed that specifically, I thought I would be shaking, but I wasn't. I was very, very still, and the kitchen was very quiet, and the only sound was the refrigerator running and somewhere outside a car passing slowly with music playing, something with bass that I felt more than heard. Then I went to the DeKalb County Deed Records online portal and searched for the property address. There was a quitclaim deed filed November 14, 2020. Grantor, Abena Osei. Grantee, Ashworth Property Holdings, LLC. My mother's signature was at the bottom. Or something that was supposed to look like it. I had seen my mother sign her name thousands of times. She had a specific signature, large, looping, the capital A in Abena almost a full inch tall, the O in Osei dipping well below the baseline. She wrote it the same way every time. It was as consistent as a fingerprint. The signature on the deed was small. The letters were compressed and slightly tilted. The capital A was barely distinguished from the lowercase. It did not look like my mother's signature. It looked like someone who had seen her signature once and tried to reproduce it from memory. I screenshotted everything. I printed everything. I made a second copy and put it in an envelope in my car. Then I sat very still for a long time more. I thought about what Patricia had said 6 weeks after Mama moved in. I'll manage it. She had managed it, all right. I did not call Patricia that night. I knew, with a certainty that surprised me, that calling her immediately would be the wrong move. If she knew I knew, she could prepare. I needed to understand first, as fully as I could, what had happened and what I had. I didn't sleep. I spent the night reading everything I could find about quit-claim deeds in Georgia, about elder financial exploitation, about what constitutes an invalid deed transfer. By 4 a.m, I had filled a legal pad with notes and questions, and the names of things I needed to find out. I drove to the house on Sycamore Hill Road 2 days later, a Thursday, when I knew Patricia would be at work. I still had my key. Patricia had never asked for it. I let myself in. The house smelled different, a cleaning product I didn't recognize, something chemical and pine-adjacent. The furniture was still there, but some of my mother's things had been moved. The photographs that had lined the hallway wall were gone. The hook by the back door where my mother always hung her church cardigan was empty. I went to the pantry. The recipe tin was still there. Second shelf, between the dried crayfish, which someone had thrown away, the shelf just held dust now, and a canister of baking powder that had been my mother's for 15 years. I don't know why I picked up the recipe tin. Instinct, maybe. Grief. The need to hold something that was actually hers. I set it on the kitchen counter and opened it. The index cards were still there, 60 or 70 of them, some going back to cards her own mother had sent from Ghana, written in a mix of Twi and English that I could read partially and had always meant to learn fully. I started flipping through them, not looking for anything, just touching them. Near the back of the box, tucked behind the rice and stew cards, was an index card that was not a recipe. It was written in my mother's handwriting, unmistakably hers, the large looping letters, the A in Abena reaching upward. It was dated September 28, 2020, 5 days before she moved to Sunrise. It said, "I am writing this for Diana. I know what is happening to my mind. Patricia has asked me to sign papers about the house. I told her I will speak to a lawyer first. She said there is no time and that she is protecting me. I do not feel protected. I have not signed anything. I am putting this here because Diana will look here. Diana knows this box. This is not a recipe. If you find this, come and look for Mr. Boateng. He has the other papers. His number is in my church directory, page 14. I love you, my child. Mama." I read it 5 times. My mother, in the last clear days before her clarity began to go, my mother had known. She had felt something was wrong. She had written it down in the place she knew I would look. The one place Patricia would never think to look because Patricia had never cared about the recipe tin, had never wanted to learn the recipes, had always said Ghanaian food was too heavy. My mother had left me a letter in a recipe box. And she had given me a name. Clifford Boateng. I found his number in the church directory in my mother's room at Sunrise, page 14, just as she had written. He was a retired real estate attorney, 80 years old, who had been a member of First Emmanuel Presbyterian for 42 years, and had been my mother's friend since before I was born. I called him on a Friday morning, in February 2021. "Diana," he said, as though he had been waiting, "I was wondering when you would call." Clifford Boateng told me that my mother had come to see him on September 26, 2020, a week before she moved to Sunrise. She had driven herself, which he had noted as significant given how her driving had already begun to concern him at church. She had been, he said, completely herself that afternoon. Sharp, purposeful. She had told him that Patricia was pressuring her to sign documents related to the house. She didn't fully understand the documents. Patricia had not let her keep copies. She had told him she was worried. She had asked him to hold onto a letter she had written and a copy of the actual property deed showing her as the sole owner, in case she needed them later. He had them. He had kept them for 4 months, waiting. "Your mother was a wise woman," Mr. Boateng said. "She knew her mind was changing. She moved quickly in the window she had." He gave me the letter and the deed copy in person, in his kitchen, over tea. The letter was 2 pages, handwritten, dated September 26, 2020, stating clearly that she had not authorized any transfer of the house, that she was under no undue pressure at the time of writing, and that her full intent was for the house to pass equally to both her daughters. She had had it notarized. Mr. Boateng had the original notary stamp. I held that letter and understood what my mother had done in the last clear week of her life before the fog thickened and made such clarity impossible. She had taken 2 days and used them like tools. I also understood then that whatever Patricia had done, she had done knowing she was racing a window too. I tried first to resolve this without lawyers. I know that sounds naive in retrospect. I want to say I was trying to give my sister a chance. More honestly, I was terrified of what it would mean if I didn't. I called Patricia on a Saturday morning and asked if we could meet. She said she was busy that weekend. I said it was about the house. She said she'd call me back. She called back 3 days later and said, "What about the house?" I told her I knew about the transfer to Ashworth Property Holdings. Silence. Then, "That's been handled legally, Diana, for Mama's protection." "Mama didn't sign that deed," I said. "She signed it in November." Her voice had gone completely flat, professional, the HR voice. "Patricia, she had been in memory care for 6 weeks. She couldn't have meaningfully signed a legal document, and that signature doesn't look like hers." "You're not an attorney," Patricia said. "No," I said, "but I'm going to find one." She hung up. 2 days later, I received a letter from an attorney named Douglas Ferris of Ferris, Blackwood and Associates, informing me that Ashworth Property Holdings, LLC was the legal owner of the property at address, that the transfer had been executed in full compliance with Georgia law, and that any attempt to contest the deed could result in legal action. A letter from an attorney, sent within 48 hours of a single phone call. She had been ready for this. I drove to the house the following Tuesday. The locks had been changed. She had taken my keys' usefulness from me in the 48 hours between my call and that afternoon. I stood on the porch of my mother's house and looked at the lock, and then I looked at the empty flower bed where the marigolds used to be, and I breathed in the cold February air for a long time. Then I got back in my car and called Clifford Boateng. "I need a real estate litigation attorney," I said. "Someone who handles deed fraud." "I know exactly who to call," he said. "Her name is Yvette Chambers. She is not cheap and she is not gentle, and she is exactly who you need." Mrs. Adiz Nwasu had lived 2 houses down from my mother for 27 years. She had come to this country from Enugu, Nigeria, in 1979, and she had the particular clarity of a woman who had survived a great deal and taken careful, internal notes about all of it. She was 74 years old and she missed nothing. When I called her and explained what had happened, not all of it, the outline of it, she was quiet for a moment and then she said, "I have been waiting for someone to ask me." We met at her kitchen table. She made us tea. She settled into her chair the way older women do when they're about to say something important, a small adjustment, a drawing in, a readiness. "Patricia and a man in a suit came to the house on a Saturday," she said. "I remember because I was on my porch deadheading my chrysanthemums and I could see your mother's door from where I sat. This was October, before your mother went to the facility, maybe 3 weeks before. October 2020, 3 weeks before the move to Sunrise. They went inside, Mrs. Nwasu continued, wrapping both hands around her mug. They were there for about 40 minutes. When they left, the man had a folder under his arm. Your mother stood in the doorway and watched them go, and she had an expression on her face. She paused. I have been thinking about that expression since November, when I saw the man come back alone and go inside with a key that was not your mother's key. Your mother's key was on a red fob. I had seen it 1,000 times. This key was on a plain ring. November 2020. After the transfer, Greg Ashworth letting himself into a house that now belonged to his company with a key he'd had made. What did my mother's expression look like, I asked, when they left? Mrs. Nwasu looked at me steadily. It looked like she was watching someone take something from her, and she knew she could not stop them, but she was going to look them in the face while they did it. A pause. That is not a small thing. That is a kind of bravery. I had to look at the window for a moment. Mrs. Nwasu was willing to testify to everything she had seen. She was precise about dates. She kept a gardening journal which she went and retrieved and showed me. October 10, 2020, Patricia, an unknown man, briefcase at Abena's house, 40 minutes departed 2:15 p.m. November 22, 2020, unknown man, dark blue car, let himself into Abena's house with single key, no red fob. November 22, 2020, lights on inside until 6 p.m., departed alone. Dated, timed, written in her careful cursive in a spiral-bound notebook. Yvette Chambers, when I brought her this, looked at the notebook entries and said, "This is a gift." Mrs. Nwasu was not finished. There was a third visit, she said. In November also, your sister came alone. She let herself in with the new key. She was inside for over 2 hours. When she came out, she had bags, not large bags, grocery bags, paper, not carrying furniture, carrying things, small things. She met my eyes. Things that might fit in bags. Things one might remove before a family member comes to look. I thought about the empty hallway wall, the missing photographs, the bare hook, the marigolds replaced with gravel. My mother's things, disappearing bag by bag into my sister's car, while my mother sat in a memory care facility 8 miles away and looked at puzzles. I drove home that evening, and I sat in my parking lot for a long time with the engine off, and the windows fogging up from my breath. Then I called Yvette Chambers and told her we were going forward. I want to tell you about the last Sunday I spent with my mother that felt like the old Sundays. It was March 2021. I had been going to Sunrise every other Sunday for 5 months. Most visits were good, she knew me, she was glad to see me. We held hands and looked out the window at the garden where the facility kept seasonal flowers in raised beds. She liked the raised beds. She said they looked tidy. This Sunday was different. She was having a clear day, the kind that become rarer and more precious as the illness progresses, the kind you are afraid to speak too loudly in case you disturb something. She knew it too. I could tell from the way she looked at me when I came in, alert, fully present, slightly amused the way she used to be amused when she was about to say something true. "Sit down," she said. "I have things I want to say while I can." I sat, I held her hands. I tried not to look like I was memorizing her, though I was. "Did you find the card?" she asked. "Yes, Mama." "Did you find Mr. Boateng?" "Yes." She nodded, satisfied. "Good, I was not certain you would think to look in the box. But then I thought you used to come and find me in the kitchen when you were small, even when you were supposed to be asleep. You always knew where to find me." I pressed my face against her hand for a moment. She let me. "Patricia believes she is protecting something," my mother said carefully. "She has always confused protecting with possessing. When you were children, she used to take your toys not because she wanted them, but because she wanted to know they were safe." Safe meant with her, a pause. I do not say this to excuse her. What she has done cannot be excused, but I want you to understand it, so that when you fight, and you must fight, you are fighting for the right thing. "What is the right thing?" I asked. "The house," she said simply. It is not about the house, but we must start with the house. We sat together for almost 3 hours that afternoon. She told me about meeting my father for the first time. She told me about her mother, my grandmother, whom I never met, who had the same recipe tin and the same looping handwriting. She told me she wasn't afraid, and I believed her because she had never lied to me about hard things. Before I left, she held my face in both her hands and looked at me. "You were always the one who stayed," she said. "Not because you couldn't leave, because you chose to stay. That is not nothing, that is everything." I cried in the parking lot for about 20 minutes. Then I drove home. That was the last Sunday she was fully herself. By April, the fog had thickened significantly. By May, she had days where she didn't know my name. She always knew my face, always reached for me when I came in, always settled when I held her hand, but the name came and went. The name doesn't matter, I told myself. I am here, she knows I am here. I am still telling myself this. Yvette Chambers was 52 years old, compact and precise, with natural hair cut close and reading glasses she wore pushed up on her forehead until she needed them, at which point she would lower them without ceremony and say something that made the other side reconsider their choices. She had been practicing real estate litigation in Atlanta for 24 years. She had handled 14 deed fraud cases. She had never lost one. She reviewed everything I brought her over the course of 2 meetings. The county deed records showing the transfer, the notarized letter from my mother, dated 5 days before the transfer was allegedly signed, the recipe card, the church directory with Mr. Boateng's number circled, the original property deed in my mother's name, Mrs. Nwasu's gardening journal with the dated entries, and a copy of a cognitive assessment from Dr. Ademi, dated August 2020, which I had requested from the medical practice under my rights as an immediate family member, which noted that my mother was showing moderate impairment in executive function and short-term memory formation. 2 months before the alleged signing. Yvette looked at all of it. Then she looked at me over her reading glasses. "Your mother built you a case," she said, "in a week while she still could." I know. Do you understand what that means? She knew exactly what was happening. She knew she might not be able to explain it herself later. So she created witnesses and documentation and a trail that she knew would matter. I told her I understood. "Good," she said. "Then let's go get your mother's house back." She filed the contest of the deed in April 2021. The grantor lacked legal capacity at the time of signing. The signature on the deed was not authentic. The deed was the result of undue influence and fraud. Patricia's attorney, Douglas Ferris, filed a response within 2 weeks. Patricia claimed my mother had signed freely and knowingly. She submitted a statement that my mother had good days and bad days, but was fully present and aware on November 14, 2020. She submitted photographs of my mother at sunrise that were dated, she claimed, from that November period, showing her engaged and lucid. Yvette noted that the photographs showed my mother in clothes she had not taken to sunrise. She had taken very little, which meant the photographs may have been taken before the facility move. She requested discovery. Ferris objected. Yvette pushed. The court ordered it. The deposition was in September 2021. Patricia came in with Ferris. She was wearing a gray blazer and her expression was completely controlled. She looked, I thought, like someone who had rehearsed. She had not rehearsed for Yvette. Yvette asked about the October 10 visit, the one in Mrs. Nwasu's journal. Patricia said she didn't recall a specific October 10 visit. Yvette asked whether Patricia had ever brought an attorney to the house to meet with her mother. Patricia said no. Yvette placed Mrs. Nwasu's journal entry in front of her. Patricia said Mrs. Nwasu was an unreliable neighbor who interfered in family matters. Yvette asked whether my mother had ever told Patricia she wanted to speak to an attorney before signing any documents. Patricia said she didn't recall her saying that. Yvette asked how my mother had been able to sign a legal document in November 2020 when her own physician had noted significant executive function impairment in August 2020. Ferris objected. Yvette moved on. Yvette then placed the notarized letter in front of Patricia, asked her to read the date aloud. September 26, 2020, asked her to confirm this was before the facility move on October 3. Patricia confirmed. Your mother wrote, in a notarized statement, 5 days before moving to memory care, that she had not authorized any property transfer and intended the house to pass equally to both daughters. Were you aware of this document? Long pause. No, Patricia said. Were you aware your mother had visited a real estate attorney, Mr. Clifford Boateng, on September 26, 2020? Another pause. No. Yvette let the silence sit for a moment. No further questions at this time, she said. I watched Patricia walk out of that conference room, and for the first time in this entire ordeal, I felt something other than fear or grief. I felt a cold, clean certainty. My mother had known, she had prepared, she had trusted me to find it. I was not going to let her down. The handwriting analysis report came in October 2021. Yvette had retained a certified forensic document examiner, a woman named Dr. Sandra Phelps, who had testified in court proceedings in Georgia, Florida, and South Carolina over a 20-year career. Dr. Phelps examined the signature on the quitclaim deed alongside 12 authenticated samples of my mother's signature from documents spanning 2010 to 2019, bank records, church documents, a letter to Patricia from 2017 that Patricia herself had submitted in discovery, not realizing what it would be used for. Dr. Phelps's report was 14 pages. The conclusion, stated plainly in the executive summary, the signature on the quitclaim deed dated November 14, 2020, is inconsistent with the known signatures of Abena Osei, and in the opinion of this examiner, was not produced by Mrs. Osei. 14 pages of analysis, and then that one sentence. I sat in Yvette's office and read it, and felt the ground shift in the way it does when something you've been hoping for becomes something you can hold. This is significant, Yvette said. Combined with the notarized letter, the cognitive assessment, and Mrs. Nwasu's testimony, we have a strong case. I won't say certain, no case is certain, but strong. What happens now? We file for a summary judgment motion in the original deed fraud case. We also file a complaint with the Georgia Real Estate Fraud Unit. This isn't just a civil matter, Diana. If that signature was forged, a crime was committed. A complaint was filed with the appropriate authorities in November 2021. I am not able to discuss the particulars of that portion of the matter, on advice of counsel, except to say that an investigation was opened. Ferris contacted Yvette the week after that filing. He requested a meeting. Yvette went alone. By design, she didn't want me in the room because, as she put it, I need to have a conversation that your presence would complicate. She came back and told me that Ferris was exploring a negotiated resolution. What does that mean? I asked. It means they are scared, she said. November 2021 to March 2022 was the hardest period. The case was moving, but legal processes move slowly, and in the meantime, my mother's house sat in the name of a company her son-in-law owned, and I could not enter it, and I was spending savings I didn't have on attorney's fees that were not inconsiderable. There was a moment in January 2022, a Thursday night. I remember it specifically because I had just gotten off a call with Yvette about a procedural delay, and then sat at my kitchen table eating cereal for dinner because I hadn't gone to the grocery store in 2 weeks. There was a moment when I thought about dropping it. I want to be honest about this. The thought was, what if I just stopped? What if I accepted that Patricia had done this and I could not undo it, and some things cannot be undone? What if I let the house go and kept the visits to Sunrise and kept being my mother's daughter in the ways I still could be without the fight? I thought about this for approximately 4 minutes. Then I thought about my mother, sitting with Mr. Boateng, in a week she knew was limited, making careful arrangements with the mental clarity she had left. She had not quit, she had used what she had. I put my bowl in the sink and called Yvette and told her I was continuing. "I know," Yvette said. "I've met your mother's paperwork. She raised someone who doesn't quit." In February 2022, Ferris made a formal settlement offer. Ashworth Property Holdings would transfer the property back to an estate account in my mother's name, with Greg and Patricia relinquishing all claim. In return, I would agree not to pursue the criminal complaint further and would sign a non-disparagement agreement. I wanted to take it. Yvette told me to think carefully. "The non-disparagement clause means you can never publicly discuss what happened," she said, "to anyone, including your mother's friends, including, eventually, your mother's grandchildren if they ever ask. You would be legally obligated to say nothing." I thought about Mrs. Nwasu, about the expression she had described on my mother's face, about who deserved to have that truth kept silent. "No," I said. Yvette said, "Good," and I thought I heard her smile. We declined. We went to court. The hearing was April 7, 2022. Yvette presented the case in full. The notarized letter, Mr. Boateng's testimony, Dr. Adami's cognitive assessment, Dr. Phelps's handwriting analysis, Mrs. Nwasu's testimony and gardening journal, and the formation date of Ashworth Property Holdings. October 22, 2020, 19 days after my mother entered memory care. Ferris countered. He called Greg Ashworth to testify. Greg said my mother had been fully present and willing. He said it had been her idea to protect the house this way. He said Diana had always been difficult and was motivated by jealousy of Patricia's success. Yvette asked Greg on cross-examination whether he had been present when my mother signed the deed on November 14, 2020. He said yes. She asked him to describe the circumstances. He described a kitchen table, afternoon light, my mother in good spirits. Yvette asked him who had witnessed the signing. He said the attorney who prepared the document, a man named Fowler. Yvette noted for the record that Attorney Fowler's license had been suspended for 3 months in 2019 for a separate matter involving document preparation. She entered this into the record. She asked Greg whether he had a notarized copy of the deed signing. He said the deed itself served as documentation. She asked whether there was any video or contemporaneous record of my mother signing, given that she was a resident of a memory care facility at the time. He said no. Yvette said, "No further questions." The judge, DeKalb County Superior Court Judge Miriam Ackefer, took a recess and then returned. She voided the deed. She found, based on the weight of evidence, that Abena Osei lacked the legal capacity to execute a property transfer on November 14, 2020, and that the signature on the deed was not consistent with her authenticated samples. She ordered the property transferred back to Abena Osei's name, with court costs and attorney's fees to be paid by the respondents. She also noted, for the record, that the matter had been referred to the appropriate authorities for further review. I sat in that courtroom and held very still until the judge left, and then I put my head down on the table in front of me and stayed there for a long time. Yvette put her hand on my back and didn't say anything. After a while, I lifted my head. "Can we call Mr. Boateng?" I asked. "Right now," she said. "I want to be honest about what came after, because it wasn't clean." The house came back into my mother's name. A property management arrangement was established through the estate. I am now the primary contact for all decisions, which is what I should have been from the beginning. The house is maintained. The utilities are paid. The raised bed garden in the backyard that my mother loved was restored. I planted marigolds along the front walk, In May 2022. Patricia did not call me after the ruling. She did not call me for 3 months. When she finally did, it was to say that she felt she had acted in the family's best interest and that she was sorry I saw it differently. This was not an apology. I did not treat it as one. I said, "I understand," which was true, and "what you did was wrong," which was also true, and then I said goodbye. Greg and Patricia have since separated. I know this from Mrs. Nwasu, who knows everything. I don't say this as something I'm glad about. People's marriages falling apart is not a thing to be glad about. I say it because it happened, and this is a true story. The matter that was referred to authorities is ongoing. I am not able to say more than that. My mother does not know any of this happened, not in a way she can hold or process. On my visits to Sunrise, we do not talk about deeds or courts or sisters. We hold hands and watch the raised beds, and I sometimes bring her index cards from her recipe tin to hold, and she runs her thumb over her mother's handwriting, and sometimes says something in Twi that I don't understand, and sometimes just holds the card and is quiet. I have started learning Twi. I am not very good yet. My mother laughs when I try. It is one of the best sounds I have ever heard. Yvette Chambers is now on my personal list of people I would do anything for. She sends me a text every year on April 7, just a single word. Marigolds. I send her one back. Clifford Boateng came to the house for dinner in June 2022. I made my mother's groundnut soup, following her index card exactly. He ate 2 bowls and told me it was exactly right. I cried a little into the 3rd bowl, and he pretended not to notice, which was the kindest thing anyone did for me that year. Mrs. Nwasu and I have coffee together on the 1st Saturday of every month. She brings her gardening journal. I bring plantain chips. We sit on her porch and talk about her chrysanthemums and my mother and things that happened long ago that still matter. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, everything. The recipe tin sits on my kitchen counter now. I brought it home from Sunrise after the ruling. My mother agreed in one of her clearer moments, patting my hand and saying, "You take it, keep it safe." So I do, I keep it safe. I have cooked my way through about half the cards. The ones in Twi I am working through slowly, with the help of a translation app and a Ghanaian cookbook I found at a used bookstore in Little 5 Points, and with occasional phone calls to a distant cousin in Kumasi, who finds my questions both touching and amusing. The index card that was not a recipe is at the front of the box. I kept it there. My mother's handwriting, the large looping letters, the date in the corner. A letter left in a recipe box by a woman who knew her time was running short and used it as carefully as anyone I have ever known. I think about that a lot. The courage it takes to act clearly in a window you know is closing. To do the hard thing while you still can, knowing you may not be able to explain it afterward, trusting that the person who needs to find it will find it. My mother trusted me to look in the recipe box. She was right. I visit her every other Sunday. She doesn't always know my name. She always knows my face. She reaches for my hand when I come in and holds it the whole time I'm there. Sometimes she falls asleep holding it, and I stay until the aide comes and tells me gently that it's time. The house on Sycamore Hill Road is still there. The height chart in the kitchen doorframe is still there, my height at 9 years old, Patricia's at 12, both in our mother's handwriting, pencil on painted wood. I stood next to it last month, in the kitchen, late afternoon light through the south-facing windows. The same light my mother had loved for 30 years. It still lasts into late afternoon. Some things hold on. If you've watched this far, thank you. I know this story is a long one and I know it's hard. These stories are always hard. That's why they matter. I want to say something practical for anyone who might be watching this and recognizing something in it. If you have an aging parent, get the important documents in order now, before there's a crisis, before clarity becomes unreliable, before someone with different intentions starts having conversations you're not part of. A notarized letter stating intent. A current will with a qualified attorney. Clear documentation of who is authorized to make decisions and in what circumstances. It is not morbid to do this. It is not pessimistic. It is the thing my mother did for me. In the last week, she was fully herself, and it made the difference between being able to fight and having nothing to fight with. My mother was wise enough to trust me with the truth before she lost the ability to say it. I am asking you to be that wise for your family and to let the people who love you be that wise for you. The recipe tin is on my counter. I'm making jollof rice this weekend. I'm getting better at it. If this story meant something to you, please leave a comment. Tell me your story, or tell me what you're holding onto, or just tell me something real. I read them. I always read them. Hit subscribe if you're new. New stories every week. Take care of yourselves. Take care of your people.